Hi, everybody. Welcome to the virtual festival and to the panel discussion of making sweet tea. I'm Marina Yuriva. I'm the media director of Art Film City. And today with us, the creators of the film Making Sweet Tea, um, Dr. E. Patrick Johnson. Maybe you guys want to introduce yourself because you have different roles.
I am E. Patrick Johnson. I am a co-executive producer and one of the subjects of the film.
And oh, go on, Nora.
It's okay. I'm Nora Gross. I'm a co-director and one of the producers and cinematographers on the film.
And I'm John Jackson, and co-direct with Nora, and I'm listed as co-executive producer with E. Patrick Johnson.
Thank you. So nice to meet you, and thank you for the film. It's absolutely amazing. So, first thing I want to talk about is sweet tea itself. And to me, it seemed like kind of a metaphor for maybe the tradition and the cultures of the South, and it feels like a little bit bittersweet and nostalgic. And especially during the film, you can see the evolution of that when, Patrick, you started with making sweet tea with your mother, and you have the recipe, and then in the middle of the film, you make it yourself, and at the end, you're making it with your friend, and he uses a different recipe with peaches, and at first you kind of hesitant maybe, but then you say, oh, it tastes good. So can you talk about this a little bit?
Unmute myself. Sweet tea is a staple drink of the South, and the sweeter it is, the more authentic it is. We, as a kid, used to drink sweet tea just almost every day. I don't do that now because I call it diabetes in a glass. But it's also a part of Black gay vernacular, particularly the tea part. It means gossip and or information. And so when I was writing the book, I wanted to incorporate both something that was a part of Southern culture, like sweet tea, but also something that was part of Black gay culture. So that's how the metaphor initially emerged. And then when we were making the film, we also wanted to capture, as you were just saying, all the different registers of tea. It can be bitter, it can be sweet, it can be lighter, darker. Everybody has their own recipe for sweet tea. Some people add things to it. Some people don't add anything to it. So that's how life is, and so we wanted to capture that. And then there are lots of things that are working on a meta level in the film. And sweet tea is one of those things too. And that's how we actually came up with the name of the film, Making Sweet Tea, because we all are physically making tea in the film, but it's also about the making of these lives, the making of the play, and the making of the film.
Wow, that's great. It's so beautiful and such an intricate detail. So can you tell us more about, there is a book and there is a play and there is a film, and what comes first and how they interact with each other? You mentioned the word meta, and how all of you, what roles did all of you play in that?
I'll just give a very quick evolution of the project. So it was first a book. Actually, that's actually not true. There was first the making of the book, because I started performing the stories before the book was even published. So from 2004 to 2006, I was collecting the oral histories. In 2006, I started performing the oral histories. The book came out in 2008. The play premiered in 2009, and now we have the film. And now, talk about meta. We just published the play script from Northwestern University Press. So now there might be other people performing the play. So I might be watching people play me in the play. So that's sort of the evolution of the project. It's the gift that keeps on giving in a good way.
Oh, wow. That's great. And what was it your idea to make the film, or whose idea was it?
So I guess I'll jump in. I came to see the first version of the full stage play that E. Patrick put on in Chicago, and even before it was done, while I was still imbibing the performance in the theater, I thought, wow, this would be amazing on film. And for a whole bunch of reasons, we had been invested at the university in getting students to think about, including and especially PhD students, to think about using things like film and audio in their research in a much more fulsome way. And so this was someone who had already decided that his version of being a scholar, being an academic, included being a performer. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to catch the story of his process, of his method, from field work all the way to the stage, and then to turn that screw one more rotation and give us some sense of what could be added to the story if we did it in film. And so that was the idea. And once we started to talk about it, the thing we thought was cool that the film could do that the stage play couldn't pull off was that we had actually restage some of his performances in the men's homes or in places where they work. And we thought that would be something that just adds another, and I think you see in the film just how poignant and powerful those experiences are when the men are watching him perform them in these spaces that they know very intimately. And so we had the idea back then, but it really didn't start to get going for a few years because we were both working full time as writers, and he's a performer. But once Nora came on, and Nora was one of the PhD students at the University of Pennsylvania at the time, she started to find ways to carve out time for us to really finally get this thing completed. And that started in earnest. When would you say we really started to move on the production side, Nora?
In 2014, I think we did our first filming. There was a little bit of filming in early 2014 around the sort of behind the scenes of the staged reading, where you see Patrick and the director of the play working together. And then in summer 2014, we did our first of the shoots with one of the men, and that was the Herald and Herald in Washington D.C. And that was our first sort of experimenting with what it would look like and how we could film Patrick doing the monologues in front of the men whose monologues it was, and getting to see their reactions and see them in their own space. So that the filming was from 2014 until I want to say about 2017, 2018. And along the way, we were also shaping the story and beginning to edit, and finally finished it last year.
Wow, that's great. So all of you are in academia, and all of you have what are your roles, and what do you study? So I guess I'm the newest member of the tribe. I finished my PhD a few months ago in sociology and education, and just started my first job as a professor. And I am an ethnographer, like both of my colleagues. So I specifically study young people in schools, in and out of schools, but also the intersections of race and gender and other sort of identity categories. So it definitely intersects with this work a lot.
And I'm also I'm also an ethnographer, but I'm an anthropological ethnographer, and I always tease Nora about how big a difference that makes. But people would say I do urban ethnography, the anthropology of race and identity. The last major project, which took me about 10 years to complete, was an ethnography of a transnational spiritual community of African American expats who left the United States in 1967, first for West Africa, and then eventually for what they regeographized as Northeast Africa, which we know as the modern state of Israel. And so I look at how that group uses media to create a community that can actually stretch across 4 different continents. And I've always been a filmmaker, studied it as an undergraduate at Howard, and so I've tried to incorporate filmmaking in different ways, both into my pedagogy in the classroom, but also into some of the things I produce as a professional cultural critic and anthropologist.
And I am a scholar of performance studies, African American studies, and I focus a lot on sexuality and gender. Like Nora and John, I'm also an ethnographer and an oral historian and a performer of all kinds. I do a little bit of everything.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I remember that part in the film where you, Patrick, are getting your PhD and going back to your hometown and receiving it. And I actually, I also have a PhD, but in science. So it's a different branch of academia, and we all know the issues about the representation and diversity in academia. And now there are many conversations about women in science academia, about the about people of color. And I noticed that there is not a lot of talk about the queer representation or queer visibility. And I just remember you saying that you, in your hometown at his school, they recognized you and they honored you, but you weren't out. So I guess my question is how do these different parts of diversity, what they mean to you and how important they are in academia?
And that's interesting that you asked that because we just did a Q&A in my hometown right before this, talking about the role that Hickory, which is where I was born and raised and where I was honored. I wasn't out when they were celebrating my day for getting a PhD. I think that the one thing that the film does a great job is, and it does this with all of the characters in the film, is that at some point in each of our lives, we're not standing in our own truth. And for me, that was around being queer, even though I'm an academic, and at that time already had a job teaching. And in my professional life, I was out, but not in my personal life in the sense of my hometown. And for some of the other men, it may not have been their sexuality. It might have been, what was going on with them with their health, or for Charles's gender identity, or, whatever the case may be. So I think the ways in which our identities intersect in our public facing lives and our private lives are one of the things that runs throughout the film. And then in this particular moment, especially given the Trump administration's most recent Orwellian executive order about race and gender in particular, I think we're at a really interesting moment in our society to figure out how can we both reckon with our own evolution as humans and all the ways in which the different parts of our culture and uh, sense of self are actualized. At the same time, we're dealing with the fact that parts of our ourselves will never be recognized or never be accounted for because of uh, white supremacy, homophobia, sexism, and all the other societal ills. So it's an interesting, balancing act, because one of the reasons why people don't come out, or I should say, stand in their own truth, because coming out, that's a whole other, you know, uh, the use of that term is also political. But I'll say the reason why some people don't stand in their truth is because they know once they do, it will be countered with some kind of oppressive or retaliatory force. And so we're all trying to negotiate those things based on our subject position. And in the academy, no less than in, everyday life. Um, I think the film does a good job of capturing how we're all sort of walking that tightrope. If we use my walking down the railroad track, for instance, as a balancing act, as a metaphor for that, that railroad track in my hometown is literally the dividing line between black and white. And we're constantly walking a tightrope, trying to balance all the things that we have to account for when it comes to our identities and the responses to those identities.
And one of the things I think I know you don't see in the film, that maybe we should find some time to put online, or some kind of bonus reel if there are DVDs in the future, is amazing footage that I think Stephen and Nora shot of a high school reunion, E. Patrick's high school reunion a few years ago. And to hear his former classmates talk about how they understood E. Patrick in that moment, when he wasn't necessarily, as he said, standing in his own truth. It's so powerful. It's one of the hardest things I think we had to cut out of the film. It's one of the last things that ended up on the cutting room floor. But so much of what was really moving and poignant about hearing them talk about E. Patrick is you realize this sense that they knew and loved this person in so many different kinds of ways. And it's an eclectic group, right? White and black. But they didn't necessarily have the full picture of who this person was, who they cared about. And some of the stories in particular of the lengths maybe even to which Patrick would go to make sure that he protected himself from what could be very quickly an unsafe situation, even among people who ostensibly loved him. It's really, really moving. And so I feel bad that some of that didn't make it into the film. But it's a version, I think, of exactly how nuanced and complicated everyone's life is, but specifically lives in the context of a world where we know people try to attack us on any front that they imagine makes us different from either who they are or who they think we should be.
Wow, that's incredible. Can you guys please talk about the characters in the film and in the book? So I know that in the book, Patrick, you had more characters. How did you select the ones you selected for the film?
So part of it was those who were willing to participate. And most of the ones who are in the film were willing participants. Some, it took a little time for them to agree. And there were some people who we thought were going to be in the film who ended up deciding not to be. But as you see, no one's really shy. They were all pretty willing to participate. But for the play, I chose first stories that had a dramatic arc, that had a clear beginning, middle, and end, and then decided to choose of those which people were great storytellers. And so what the film is a distillation of the sort of the stories that are the most compelling, and the people whose stories are the storytellers who have a compelling way of telling their stories. But I think there were two people that we wanted to be in the film who ended up not being in the film.
Mm.
And then there was one, Sean, who isn't in the play, but he's just too amazing and engaging and lovable, and that we couldn't leave him out. So we tried to sort of seamlessly fit him in, and hope that maybe the viewer didn't notice that Patrick never performs a monologue in front of him, because there wasn't one. But Sean was important because he added some age diversity to the group of men as well, which we thought was important.
And can you talk a little bit more about the story of Charles and in general about the religion in queer Black community, and how, you know, the religion is very important, and how do you integrate it in your life?
I mean, any of us, we never know who's, and I usually defer to E. Patrick on most of the questions specifically about the men. But I guess one thing I would say, just to get it, because I know most early versions of the film ended with early drafts of the film, because we went through many different iterations. How do we tell the story? What's the best art? We knew early on that the moment of Charles finally seeing E. Patrick perform him, because Charles had never, in a very purposeful way, had never gone and seen a performance before, as a lot of the other men had. We knew that that was really powerful. And there's a version, I think, of what Charles represents that, for me, is both generalizable across the men, but also his specific version of it is really particularly moving. So one thing I think you'll find is Charles is someone who has spent a lot of time being introspective, right? He's someone who's thought about the decisions he's made. And so you see him present these incredibly detailed and eloquent articulations of the different fits and starts in his life, and the ways he's tried to navigate the kind of the competing senses of self. He's had to negotiate both internal conflict and in terms of how he interacts with folks in the outside world. And so I think the film is able to get us some small glimpse into just how ongoing and incomplete the notion of identity, all identity, is. Because we see Charles as someone who very thoughtfully and very carefully continues to grapple with what we might imagine to be the ends of his own identity and what he feels comfortable standing in, to go back to E. Patrick's phrase earlier, as a Black man in the 21st century in Hickory, who decided not to leave the way Patrick has, and who's negotiated that space with many different performances or presentation of self that play with notions of gender and sexuality and all these, I think, complicated ways. And so Charles, for us, is someone who, like the other men, is really good at telling his own story. And I think all we had to do was get out of the way and give him the space to do it. But I don't know what E. Patrick and Nora would add.
Well, and I would just say, I think there's a version of this film, or what this film could have been, or could be in a second. I mean, no, it won't be, but a version of this film that's just Patrick and Charles. And in fact, some folks we shared early rough cuts of suggested that, that their parallel life stories are so interesting in conversation with each other, and their relationship over time is so much a part of each of their stories, that could have been an entire film. That could have been the narrative that we told. And just also to add what John said, it's been really lovely, in my role, getting to know him over time and seeing the way he went from in the early years of filming in 2014 and 2015, when we took a trip down to Hickory hoping that we could film him. Patrick had discussed it with him. Charles wasn't sure. And we got there, we did some other filming, and Charles said no, he wasn't interested. And then it was another year at least of conversations between Patrick and Charles. And eventually we went back to Hickory, I think in 2015 or 2016, and filmed him. And now he's at a point, I wear the t-shirt with our poster, and Charles is our poster. He's the poster child of the film, deservedly. And I think he really loves that. So that's been really beautiful to watch his own sort of acceptance of his story, at least in the way that we are presenting it in the film.
Thank you. And Patrick, do you want to add something?
Oh, just to say that it for me, it's just been wonderful to see the evolution of Charles over the course, not just of the film, but of his life. Because I've known Charles since we were both kids, and to watch that evolution has been, really moving to me. And to see him finally end up in a place where he's at peace with himself is really gratifying.
Thank you. So this film brings up so many issues, so many different stories, and one of the conversations you're having throughout the film is about the interracial relationships, and you show 3 couples at different stages in their life, and one couple is very old, Harold, right? Harold and Harold. And one couple is you and your husband, and the other one is Duncan and his partner. So can you tell us more about this?
I think that was coincidental. In fact, I know it was. We didn't set out to feature interracial gay couples in the South. It just so happened that the men in the film were partnered with white men. It is interesting, some of the feedback that we got at a couple of the screenings was about, why is there so much representation of interracial couples in the film? And my response was, it wasn't intentional, that it just so happened to be. But I think it does raise an interesting part, because part of the film too is about the experience of racism in the South. So what's interesting to me is, despite a region that is sort of, I think, over-represented as a racist place to be, is the fact that we feature these gay men who found a way to reconcile that contradiction of living in a space that is, at least stereotypically seen as overtly, explicitly racist, yet they in love with white men married to white men. But again, we didn't set out to make some commentary on interracial gay couples.
Thank you. So one thing I noticed right now, it's 2020 and the country's very divided, and there is so much anger and violence. And your film is so refreshing in the way that it just shows love and partnership and friendship and kindness. And to me, it feels like your answer to all of that is that love. And you are feisty too. There is a moment where you talk about the boy and the knife, and but your message is just let me be. Don't just let me be myself. Can you also talk about that too?
So one way I would think about it is to say that the men represent, to me at least, as someone watching the film, people who recognize the larger structural, kind of macro structural forces, forces that are quite organized in ways that disproportionately impact people of color, that reproduce inequity. So it's not like they don't know that. It's not like they don't recognize that there's a larger system in place. But I think we've caught the men at moments when, and it probably does matter that a lot of them are a little bit older, who actually aren't overwhelmed by the inescapable reality of conflict and race in America, right? Now, and each one of them, I think if you look, you can see each one of them has their own version of a story to tell about, what might be called their own victimization, right? People taking advantage of them, abusing them, trying to deny their humanity, but they don't stay there, right? Part of what I think the film tries to show is that they keep working through it. Doesn't mean they find some solution, right? They haven't solved the problem, but they're not so, I think, caught up in the inescapable anxiety of how big the issues are that they can't still live and love and enjoy themselves and critique and spill the tea and serve the tea and build community in ways that I think are also strategies and tactics for responding to an oppressive environment. And so for me, it's about recognizing that even though the film, I think you're right, does place its emphasis on the ways in which people try to navigate the difficulties of our current world, I think it's clear that they demonstrate in no uncertain terms that they see it, that they experience it, that they've been in some ways, in different ways, harmed by it, that they continue to work through it. But the story doesn't end simply on defeat, that they continue to try to persevere in very different ways, and with no clear assumption about what the outcome will be too, right? I mean, and I think there's a version of what the film does there to me that also is a really nice intervention, a really nice way to tell the story about big issues that can also feel really small and intimate at the same time.
I'll just add that, I think one of the things that I appreciate about the film is that these men, while they acknowledge, as John said, how they are affected individually by, racism, homophobia, they're not constantly responding to that. They're not reacting constantly to these oppressive forces. They're living their lives. And I think we don't get to see that often. We get to focus on, how beat down people are and how they're struggling, whatever. And those are very real things. But we don't get to see the sort of moments in which that is put to a side and people are just sort of living their lives in a way that's productive and joyful. We don't talk about Black joy enough. And so what's complicated, I think, is how we find Black joy in the midst of Black pain. Black folk have been doing that for a long time. That it's called the blues. But we rarely get an opportunity to see that on film. And it's one of the things that I think is really powerful about the film is seeing how these men negotiate their surroundings in a way that isn't just them constantly reacting to these external oppressive forms. And I think one of the moments that crystallizes that best is actually the dinner party. I know it's only a small part of the film, but it's this sacred space where the men have come together to commune, to break bread, and whatever else is going on outside, that's on hold for this particular moment of breaking bread and building community.
Thank you. This is very hopeful and very powerful. So in the conclusion, what are the next steps for you? Patrick, you mentioned the screenplay and other people will be doing your play. What else you're planning to do?
Well, I'm planning to sit down for a minute. I've been really busy the last few years doing a lot of different things. So I'm going to enjoy the ride of the film festival, and hopefully, we are now engaged with an agent to try to get a distributor for the film. So we're hoping that it can be broadcast nationally and internationally. I am also thinking about my next project, my next written project, which I think is going to be a memoir, but really a biography of my mother. And then John has all kinds of plans for me. So I just, I just email him and say, what are we doing? And so we'll see. But Nora has lots of exciting things going on.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm definitely excited for being able to share this film more widely, and be able to also bring it to universities and colleges and figure out ways for folks to teach with it. I think there's a lot of potential there. And then, yeah, separately, my new work is sort of a continuation of my dissertation and my own academic research, which focuses on the secondary impacts of neighborhood gun violence on adolescent Black boys and their communities and their school communities. So I have a pair of films we're just finishing up making, exploring how these boys grieve when they lose friends to gun violence, and a companion film about the mothers of gun violence victims and how they're making sense of their experience and moving forward, and follows some similar themes to what we've talked about today, but in this more specific context in Philadelphia.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
And I think, hopefully continuing to get the word out about this film. We should maybe think about some kind of study guide or something that folks can use with it in an academic context. I know it's more work, but it's probably worth doing. And Patrick just finished 2 books on Black gay women in the South, and my hope is I can put the bid in to work with him on that, and maybe we can convince Nora to be a part of that team and bring some other folks in. So I'm hoping that might be, once you get some time to rest and relax, Patrick, that might be one of the next things we do.
Wow, that's so exciting. Thank you so much for joining us and talking to us. Good luck with all your next projects. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.